raise awareness with youth.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Green Economy Congress team, I would like to welcome you to the panel Climate Neutrality in Western Balkans, Time to Set a New Path. The idea today is to discuss the climate reality and the future of climate neutrality of our region, as well as how Northern Macedonia, Bosnia and Herzegovina and Serbia are facing and fighting the new climate momentum. Bearing the professional background, bear in mind the professional background of our panelists, I have no doubt that the conversation is going to be very interesting and fruitful. So let me welcome Ms. Anna Petrovska from Democratic Renewal of Macedonia. Thank you for accepting to participate, Anna. Mr. Vedat Sulic from Regional Education Information Center for Sustainable Development in Southeast Europe from Sarajevo. Hello, Vedat. Thank you for participating. And Stevan Vujasinovic from Climate Action Network, who is going to map the challenges Serbia is facing today with us in this field. Thank you, Stevan, for accepting to participate. Before we start the conversation, I think it would be useful to give just a very brief EU perspective of climate neutrality as a good framework for our conversation. Since our countries are in EU integration process and EU is trying not to leave behind our region from green transition process as it adopted the economic and investment plan for Western Balkan and the new green agenda for Western Balkans that is expected to be endorsed in this November in Sofia during the Western Balkan Summit. Of course, we can discuss later on about the level and the achievements of that support. But now, just as I said very briefly, I will introduce what's happening now in the EU and when climate neutrality came on the agenda. So in 2019, EU leaders endorsed the objective of achieving a climate neutral EU by 2050, and this followed the commitment made by EU member states and EU on signing the Paris Agreement in 2015. And the climate action actually is at the heart of the European Green Deal. So the EU is fighting the climate change through very ambitious policies at home and close cooperation with international partners. So it has put forward a plan to further cut emissions by at least 55% by 2030 and aims to become the world's first climate neutral continent by 2050. So at the moment, one of the highest priority on the EU agenda is the EU climate law. And I would like to start the conversation with you. What is the highest priority on Western Balkans countries' agendas? Is there any positive climate-related efforts in the region? What are actually your views on about the current situation in your countries in the field of climate policy, energy transition, energy investments especially, and in general environmental challenges? So Anna, I would like to give you the floor to open this discussion and conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So in North Macedonia, climate action is very high on its agenda. We are currently preparing a comprehensive strategy on climate action and climate law. So I believe we will be the first country in the region that will have a new law trying to align with the EU package 2030. We have developed a new energy strategy going through 2040, which brings forward also the climate issues. So climate and energy was taken into account integrally. The new energy strategy proposes 3 scenarios for the future energy development, one of which would keep coal as main energy source by 2040, but the other two scenarios are proposing the phase out of coal by the end of 2030. So it was modeled and it is possible. Replacement to coal could be natural gas coming from Greece, and also introduction of more intensive electricity generation from renewable sources. We have also a new strategy on energy efficiency, and we have adopted energy efficiency law. We would expect also by increasing the energy efficiency to reduce the electricity and energy demand in general, so that would bring us better in terms of energy transition. But what I would like to emphasize is the policy of the government to intensify the generation of energy from solar power. So there are many ongoing activities of installing a solar power generation, one replacing one coal thermal plant in Oslome. And further, many initiatives tendering the possibility to private sector to open, to install new solar plants. So in general, I would say that a lot of issues are going on in terms of policy, but also implementation. Nevertheless, we remain a country with high vulnerability. A lot of activities need to be implemented in the other sectors, not only in the energy, but also in the sector of buildings, in the sector of transport, and especially agriculture and waste management. So the progress in these sectors with regard to climate action is pretty low. I believe this is critical in other countries, and air pollution is something that will not be possible to tackle only by the energy policy. We will need to do much more on local level with reducing local pollution, and that's why the law, the drafting of the law on industrial emissions is very important, but the progress is not satisfactory. As well is very poor the inspection, the environmental inspection. So in conclude, on this initial remarks, I would say that implementation and the inspection needs to improve their performance. So I would say for the beginning, this is the picture of the climate policy in Macedonia. If needed, I can add.
Whether we can continue with the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So how level, but also you can give your perspective about situation in Western Balkan as well.
Yeah, thank you for having me here and giving the opportunity to the rest of the population does not. And this is one of the reasons why do we lack in terms of advanced energy, climate policy and energy policy in Bosnia and Herzegovina, because a vast majority of the people here have other priorities which are linked with corruption, which are linked to general poverty, etc., and also ethno-nationalistic issues, which still remain the key policy determinant of decision makers in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I have to mention that after the setup of the Energy Community Treaty in 2006, Bosnia and Herzegovina at the beginning was among the leaders in terms of complying with with the entire acquis, which is under the Energy Community Treaty. However, in the last about 10 years, we have faced a huge letdown in compliance in many sectors, in energy and climate as well, which is due to the fact that on the one hand, the gas and the coal, the existing coal lobby in Bosnia and Herzegovina is and still is a huge and an important player in the energy field and energy market in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And one example of this is the strategy of the energy strategy of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which was drafted and adopted in 2018, so about 2 years ago, and it envisaged the development of the Bosnia and Herzegovina energy sector until 2035 with 4 different scenarios, out of which just one scenario is called a renewable scenario, whereas the other 3 scenarios emphasize the use of coal and gas. However, one of the critical points, apart of focusing on gas and coal, the strategy itself is that the strategy itself is not a strategy. It's more like different paths which Bosnia could go in terms of energy planning. And this came to a price nowadays when there are 3 very important processes undergoing. One of them is the National Energy and Climate Plan, which is still in the development phase in Bosnia and Herzegovina. On the other hand, we have the Environmental Social Action Plan, which is also under development in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and also the NDCs. So these 3 processes should have support in the energy strategy, but having said before that the energy strategy itself does not have a clear vision where does the energy sector should go in Bosnia and Herzegovina, rather it provides where the energy sector could go. So in this sense, we are facing now a huge debate here in Bosnia and Herzegovina among different stakeholders, from the civil society organizations point of view, from the decision makers, experts, academia, etc. How Bosnia and Herzegovina will tackle the reduction of carbon emissions until 2030 and later on. So at the moment being, we do not have a clear vision, clear path whether we are going to phase out coal. There is a huge pressure, of course, from the civil society organization and the international community led by the EU and the Energy Community Treaty. However, at the moment being, we do not have set a clear vision whether we are going to phase out coal or not. On the other hand, the remaining issue is how to ensure a proper just transition for the workers in the coal sector. We cannot simply copy-paste examples from the Western Europe and say how Germany or other countries did it, that we can do it. We have to have some tailor-made solutions for Bosnia and Herzegovina, but unfortunately we face a huge lack of capacities, starting from the intellectual capacities and knowledge on different levels, from the civil society organizations up to the decision makers. We face huge lack of competencies to address all these issues. And similar to North Macedonia and Serbia as well, I believe we face the consequences of such a policy reflect onto primarily air pollution, severe air pollution. Many cities in Bosnia and Herzegovina, not just those who host, to say so, thermal power plants like Takanj, Ugljevi, Gatsko, etc., but other countries, it's Sarajevo, Banja Luka, face severe air pollution, and this is something which is very close related to the energy sector, and actually one of the main causes for such air pollution is the energy sector, and this reflects then to the end at the health to the population, and we are among the negative leaders in terms of premature deaths caused by air pollution, etc. So these all are many issues to be tackled. On the one hand, we have environmental problems, as I said, we have social problems, we have economic problems. So the energy policy and the climate policy in Bosnia and Herzegovina is still very unclear, unfortunately, at the moment being. And once these plans, as I said, the National Energy and Climate Plan, the environmental strategy, and the NDCs are prepared, and we hope that this will happen in the next 1 to 2 years, and then we will have a much clearer picture on how the energy and climate policy in Bosnia and Herzegovina will be shaped in the next 10 and after years.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll come back later on that local bottom-up approach probably. But before we discuss that issue, I would like to ask Stevan to share with us Serbia perspective. Thank you, Stevan.
Thank you for inviting me, and thanks to all the participants. I would simplify my contribution by saying that there are good news and bad news. I will start with bad news. Unfortunately, Serbia is one of these countries, one of few countries in Europe, and the number is decreasing as we speak, that still remains, I wouldn't just say dependent, but hooked or addicted to a fossil fuel for the majority of its energy needs, namely on coal. About 70% of our supply comes from coal, from lignite. The reason this comes up as the first point on the agenda is the fact that when one discusses climate policy, obviously the efforts to decarbonize our economies and our societies, coal should be at least, and it is, the lowest hanging fruit, the first thing that needs to go to maximize the sort of impact and gain from such decarbonization efforts. Unfortunately, I try to look for less stressful ways of describing the situation here, but I have to say, unlike many other countries which are now determined to invest all efforts into building a carbon neutral future, in Serbia, the government seems intent to invest into maintaining our carbon intensive past. So our investments here seem to be directed into the past rather than the future. Why do I say this? I say this because there are not just plans to keep what's already using coal to produce energy in Serbia in terms of the infrastructure that's been inherited from the past, but we are actually now in the process of building a new coal plant in Kostolac, plus there are preparations for an additional coal plant at Kolubara, the plans for which we thought were abandoned 6 or 7 years ago, but this is now a revitalized project where public consultations are in progress on how to change the spatial plan for the Kolubara district to accommodate this new plant. So when you look at what policymakers say, of course, they will, be in favor of policies that attempt to contribute to European and global efforts to ensure decarbonization, and they will say that there is a climate policy. But when you actually see what's happening in the practice, I would actually say that there's an energy policy based on further exploiting coal as the primary energy resource, which to our government at the present time takes precedence over any other policy, because it just seems inappropriate to me to discuss climate policy when these investments continue to pour public money into last century's technology in terms of the energy sector. Those are bad news. However, there are some good news as well. I mean, one should always be positive. And I should start perhaps from that last point, where up until now, the two sectors were maintained separately in these sort of compartmentalized separate departments, as it were, of public policy. One, the energy sector, the elusive sector, where few people actually, at least to my liking, I would hope that more people take part in policy making. And then there was this other sector where we had like a separate Ministry of Environment and Environmental Protection, etc. One good news is that due to our membership in the energy community, we will now actually be in a situation like it was mentioned by a colleague in Bosnia, where we actually have to reconcile these two sectors in a national energy and climate plan. So now we actually have to look forwards with the view to deciding how and what speed and how much and how optimally to invest in the future. So that's one policy process that is just unavoidable. And I think the work that will happen on the production of our national energy and climate plan will certainly contribute towards actually more people taking an integrated view of energy and climate, which is an absolute must if we're going to change from the past and begin looking into the future. The other good news is not really good news. That's my own personal opinion. The other good news is actually the fact that this coal technology is so old, most of it is just not sustainable economically. So regardless of the fact that we have, and we shouldn't, I think in my opinion, we have to recognize that this is an enormous change. And I think it's only natural, like in most other policy processes where there is such huge change that, there is such a possibility of many people fearing change, avoiding change, looking to preserve what they know, etc. This is a big change that will be happening over the coming decades, so we have to recognize that. But the one good thing that will keep that change going is the fact that the coal technology is just finished. It's finished economically, it's finished environmentally, it's finished socially, it's just no longer acceptable. And unfortunately, it appears that some people will not take that from anyone explaining, or just will avoid facing up to that news. But coal is finished. And it's not finished because people advocate against coal or because of the decarbonization efforts. It's economically finished. The technology just doesn't perform for what we need in the 21st century. So I would liken this situation to, I was thinking about how to make this more understandable to people who may not necessarily have that kind of understanding of the energy sector. Very few of us have ever made investments of such magnitude. Do we build 600 plus million coal plants, or do we see how best to invest that money into renewable potentials or into energy efficiency schemes, etc.? I would liken this situation to something that most people in the Balkans understand, I hope, or I think at least, where people are familiar with what it's like to drive very old cars, second-hand cars. There comes a point where it's just uneconomical to own them and to operate them. And this is one such point where the technology that's now very old, it doesn't pay. It's not rational to replace something that old with something old again. We need the investment in the future. So I think it's the obsolete nature of the technology and the inability of this running on an economically sound basis that will actually force the changes that we hope to see in the future.
Thank you, Stevan. Well, now I would like to move on to talk about more about local level. As Vedad mentioned, it's not possible to replicate just some alternative solutions from other countries, and it should be tailor-made. So I would like to ask you to share with us maybe some key points on local level problems. If there is some good examples from bottom-up approach in your countries, and what you should think should be good practice for facing the problems and alternatives of Western Balkan countries. Anna, would you like to start?
Yes, just a moment. Okay. If I would like to share some good experiences in the country, I would say that these economic instruments that the government is imposing, one of which is the feed-in tariffs, which stimulate the schemes for solar power plants, knowing that we are in the south, we are abundant in solar energy, so it is also good to use it. And as my the other participants also emphasized, the coal remains the most expensive option, while the solar energy will become more cheaper and cheaper. But when it comes to feed-in tariffs and premiums, I would like to say that not all is good, because some of these incentives stimulate the development of small hydropower. And here on small hydropower, I would like to mention the movement in the Balkans, which is against the erection, installation of small hydropower. What is good in our society here is that the resistance against the construction of small hydropower plants is rising. And currently, we are facing a huge association of various stakeholders who are working to prevent the construction of 4 small hydropower plants in 2 protected areas. The movement is so-called Green Front. And as I said, it is raising, it is attracting the attention of the population, of the general public, but also of the decision makers. So I think it is a very good development, and it should spread all over the Balkans. I believe in Serbia there are also positive examples, and also in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Albania. So I think that the battle against small hydropower is very important, because small hydropower is presented as green energy, but in reality, this is not green. This is bringing benefits to a very small group of people, the investors, while making huge impacts on biodiversity and water supply for citizens, but also supply of water for agriculture. That's why I think that small hydropower is something which doesn't contribute to energy transition. And this is something that we need to present to people, and to stop investing into this, to stop the incentives for the private sector, which would in turn result in less interest by the private sector for the construction of small hydropower. What is important also, apart from the economic instruments, is also providing national financing apart from the financing from the international donors. So in my country, we are very close to establishing the Energy Efficiency Fund. And this Energy Efficiency Fund, I believe, will bring more buy-in for energy efficiency projects on local level. In this way, the municipalities will be able to finance their priority energy efficiency projects, and in this way they will sensibilize the local authorities and local population about the importance of the reduction of energy consumption, and also this will result in less CO2 emissions. When it comes to cars and old cars, imports of second-hand cars that other participants also mentioned, which is one of the causes, the sources of CO2 emission, but also emission of other air pollutants. We have adopted a new law on taxation of second-hand vehicles, which will probably in time show improvements. In the past, we had more imports of new cars because the state didn't incentivize the imports of old cars. In 2010, there was release of or tax exemption for these second-hand cars. Now we adopted again the new law on taxation of second-hand vehicles. So I would expect that the trend of the imports of second-hand cars will reduce. There are many initiatives on local level in terms of implementing their local municipal energy and climate plans, because in our legislation it is obligatory for the municipalities to have such plans. Not all of them have them, but most of them, so the biggest municipalities have adopted such plans, but in the absence of sustainable source of funding on local level, they fail to implement them. That's why this energy efficiency fund that will be soon established on national level will be a source for stimulating the energy efficiency projects on local level on public buildings. So many issues are progressing, I would say. The collaboration between national and local level is improving, but it is still much to go. And this is why we need to share the experiences, the good experiences, and collaborate also regionally. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Vedade, what is the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina?
So
regarding bottom-up approach and local initiatives.
Yeah, so in Bosnia, we have since some maybe 6-7 years ago started to work on the topic of the citizen energy and energy cooperatives, and this is something which we are occupied very much in the last, as I said, 5 to 7 years. But what I would start off is like any other social social event which occurs, we also in terms of the energy transition need a certain tipping point that, like Stefan said, coal is something which is not economically feasible. It's dirty. Everybody, and we know that for many years, but it's not changing. It's not happening. So talking about the energy transition and switching to renewables, investing into energy efficiency, there are so beautiful stories. You don't have to convince anybody that this is good, but it's not happening. And we are not phasing out coal, although everybody knows it's dirty, it's economical. So there is some reason behind, and it's very complex to say. And I do not agree to say just thermal power plants are economically not feasible. We have to shut them down. So for sure, we have to shut them down, but we have also to take into account all the other aspects which come at this price. So there has to be a certain tipping point that we start to work on the energy transition more in all of the countries and also in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And that's why we need to engage citizens into the process. Right now, our only role in the energy sectors is to consume and to pay for energy, and that's it. So we are very much involved in any kind of decision making, just those guys who are involved in some NGOs or other types of organizations who are voluntary and engagedly involved, but the rest of the population, the 99.9% of the population is not involved at any in the energy sector. So except, as I said, just in consumption and paying the bill. So, but at the end of the day, we are the one who cooperate or not cooperate within the energy projects. As Anna said, there are many fights against the hydro. So we have also here huge examples in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and one of the most famous, if I may say so, is the one in Kruščica, in central part of Bosnia and Herzegovina, where women stand for their river and they get rid of the investors, and the construction of the hydropower plant does not happen. And nowadays, just these days, we have huge movements of the NGOs, many NGOs from Bosnia and Herzegovina, even to go so far to forbid construction of small hydropower plants in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And that's the reason, that's the consequence that the decision-making process prior that, and it's today also active, it's without any kind of citizen engagement, neither in decision-making, neither in investing. And if you look at how the energy transition happened in the Western Europe, in Germany, in Holland, in Denmark, in Austria, in all the countries, the key difference is that they have a huge involvement of citizens in decision making, in investing, etc. So engaging the citizens turns a project from not in my backyard to a project in please in my backyard, because you have them on board. They are your active supporter of the projects. Talking about the local community, and from the local point of view, the local community, saying municipality or city, they don't have to be the investors into the project. They have just to create enabling conditions that investments happen. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I have done research also in the whole Western Balkan countries, it's more or less the same. About 70% of the money, which is articulating in the country's economy, belongs to citizens, either to the wages we receive for our work, to the pensions, to savings, etc. So this is a huge amount of money which can be articulated for many kind of investments, and citizen energy investing into energy through different kinds of models, like through energy cooperatives, is one of the examples how you can invest into energy using money available within the pockets of the citizens. And they are very likely to happen, these investments. Just in May, for instance, a very radical example, in May last year, the energy cooperative Vindfogel from Denmark opened a wind farm with a capacity of 350 megawatts. So this is something which is combined, all Bosnia and Herzegovina wind energy is far lower today than just this example. As I said, we have been working on this topic many years. And some 2 years ago, we said to ourselves, okay, it's much talking. Let's try this, if this can work. And we have initiated the first citizen energy project in Bosnia and Herzegovina at a facility in central Bosnia. This facility has huge need for hot water. It's a facility which hosts mentally disabled people. And we made a campaign raising money for this facility to invest into solar hot water. It was not a donation-based model, it was a reward-based model, which means that every investor into the project received a certain reward for the investment, which were different kind of goods made by the people living in this facility, made out of wood, out of textile, some jewelry, etc. By doing so, we raised something about 25,000 euros in a 2-month window. And it was the first of such kind of investment in Bosnia and Herzegovina that people, ordinary people, invested into energy project. And this example was a catalyst for some other initiatives. And just about 6-7 months after that, another example followed us. It was not implemented by us, it was implemented by another NGO from Banja Luka with a similar approach, a little bit less in the amount, but it doesn't matter. We got to the point that we start this movement. We are still expecting in Bosnia and Herzegovina to adopt the new regulation in terms of net billing and net metering, which will be a huge driving force for citizen energy projects, especially for investments into solar PV modules, etc. So our point is that change has to start from the bottom, from the citizen, from ourselves. So we have to find ways on how to engage citizens, and one way is to ask them to invest into the project. Another way is to ask for them to take part in the decision-making process. Whatever you choose, you can choose, of course, both. Citizens have to play a crucial role in the energy sector, and only then an energy transition can happen.
Thank you, Stevan. What can you tell us about local initiatives in Serbia and the local regulations?
Well, I would use the opportunity to stick with my future versus past metaphor, and I think that's one filter of actually being able to understand a good process from a bad process. If you think about the experience in Serbia recently, you can see that also there has been locally generated resistance to these, I don't even want to call them investments, so-called investments into small hydropower plants. People at local level are understanding that they're being robbed of one of their main resources, and that's actually basically starving them of a future. There is no future for the local community if you go ahead with this, whilst at the same time you notice that this is basically not contributing very much, if anything at all, to our national energy security. So we can't, even though it's masked as an investment in a renewable resource, it's actually an investment in ruining our future. Most notably, people might have heard about the success in their advocacy efforts around the protection of water resources around the Stara Planina area in southeast of Serbia, close to the border with Bulgaria. But this is a national effort now. There are community organizations getting better and better organized and voicing their opposition to this kind of investment across the country now. But I wouldn't keep it limited to energy. We see also that local communities now understand much better that without clean air, they have no future. And that doesn't just concern the energy sector, it concerns many other sectors. And what we see now is a similar kind of awakening by local level organizations who basically see that the policy process has failed them. Nobody appears to be hearing about the concerns of populations at local level which are being asked basically to survive in face of some world record-breaking air pollution, and I think that's something we share in the region as well. So they see that there's no future in the current setup. And the reason I wanted to say that this is perhaps a useful filter is that not so long ago I had the opportunity of actually visiting one of these new wind farms that was constructed in the region of Banat in Vojvodina, which is on the border with Romania. And I had the chance of speaking with the investor and the management of the plant and the developers, and learning that they actually have regular meetings with local communities prior at the planning stage, at the stage of the implementation of the investment, and even at the operational stage, because operating a wind farm has a whole bunch of different circumstances throughout the year. And given that this is a very agricultural area, it makes sense for both the operators of the wind farm and the local farmers to coordinate their operations throughout the year. So again, there you see something that works, which is participation, which is transparency, which is openness, like it was said before, allowing people to participate in processes which affect them so directly. And that's something you don't see so often. I think that's one of the processes that's going to push the decarbonization efforts forward, because even though unfortunately many in the policy-making cycles fail to see this or are basically in denial, these policies will no longer be able to be made in some, behind closed doors. People are much more attuned now to how these decisions affect them. And the other thing that I think is worthwhile highlighting is that they realize that there is a disconnect between often short-term policy considerations at some, at the governmental level in Belgrade, against long-term sustainability interests and long-term future of these communities, which are much better understood at local level. And I think that will translate and is already translating into, I don't mind saying, political pressure that actually makes policymakers in Belgrade understand that unless they get it, this will cost them votes. And at the end of the day, we live in a highly politicized environment. And I think also that's something that we share across the region. When they realize that they will lose votes, the government planners often decide that they can no longer pretend that this opposition doesn't exist. I can give a specific example and perhaps close this section with this. Last year, during the so-called smoke season in winter, when we have very bad air, we started the season with many different segments of the public being appalled by the horrible quality of air, or lack thereof, only to hear from our president that that's nonsense, that we don't have problems with air, there is no air pollution in Serbia, we don't have any industry, there's maybe 2 or 3 days a year. That was roughly around about end of October. by January, the government of Serbia was forced to begin this extraordinary working group on air pollution. Let's not get into the quality of what that working group did so far, but it shows that within 3 or 4 months, somebody somewhere decided, okay, we can no longer, afford to ignore this. We just have to, if nothing else, at least appear that we recognize the issue and begin addressing it. That kind of public pressure for participation and recognition of the real issues will hopefully drive the process forward much quicker. And I think that's an important point to make. We don't have all the time in the world. What we do in the next 10 years matters not just in our region, but also globally. After 2030 or 2040, we basically need to begin discussing how we face up to a climate that's beyond our control. So it really matters that we begin acting in the decade ahead.
Thank you, Stevan. I think it's very important now to talk about how much is the cost of the transition to climate neutrality, especially what is the strategic approach and what should be strategic approach for our region and particularly for each country. European Union established Modernization Fund, which had the meeting 2 days ago. It's a debt funding program dedicated to support lower income EU member states. Romania, Croatia, and Bulgaria are participating in that program systems and improve energy efficiency. Anna mentioned that they are planning to establish energy efficiency fund in Macedonia. But I was wondering, is there any forecast how much would that process cost each country, and what should be a strategic approach, how we should fund it? Anna, would you like to add something or?
Yeah. The costs required for the energy transition in the country is close to 1 billion, which is a significant amount. To compare, it is twice the amount which is available to my country for a grant IPA period with a time horizon of 5 years. So this amount is difficult to raise, and it must come from different sources. In terms of the strategic approach, of course, the European Union is one of the largest donors who is contributing to the demand of the country for investment and improvement of the energy situation of the country. We are now currently preparing for the IPA 3 cycle starting from 2021, and the energy sector will get less fund than the environmental sector. Actually, this is the first time that we have a pot for energy investment. In the past, IPA provided to the country only funds for technical assistance. So just to compare, the IPA 2 provided only 3 million euro, which we even didn't use properly, and will now migrate to the to be established new energy efficiency fund. But with the IPA 3 cycle, we would expect some 300 million euro for the environment to cover wastewater treatment plant, waste management, and cleanup of historical hotspots, and 100 million for energy, and these energy projects are not determined yet. So the portfolio of energy will need to be defined throughout a comprehensive assessment, and then this 100 million will be allocated according to the priority investment project. Even though we have the energy strategy, energy efficiency strategy, the renewable energy strategy, and these municipal action plans on climate and energy, we still lack the priority setting, which was the reason why the European Union didn't let us define beforehand the priority energy investments. What is known now is that this IPA 3 from the EU will not be intended to the coal phase out, but it will contribute as much as it will increase probably the input of renewable energy on the market. I also wanted to mention, although it is not directly related to climate and energy, but it will certainly contribute to air pollution, a fund which was established last year. It is so-called environmental fund, but its primary role is to provide funds for the cleanup of one historical hotspot, a landfill, a dump site where lindane, a very toxic and cancerogenic pesticide, was stored since 1970s, polluting the environment and causing also negative health effects. So this environmental fund was established by the Norwegian government, the Macedonian government, and UNOPS. It is an organization of the United Nations for project services. And it now started with a portfolio of 2 million euro, but it will certainly increase in time because other donors provide shown interest in providing input into the fund. So all in all, there are many different strategies which were adopted by the government. There is financial support from the donors. What we need to work on in the future is to absorbing actually these funds because our lessons learned show that even though the funds are here, the absorption capacity of the country is limited and we fail to utilize even the full amount of funds which is available to us. So it is not that much about having funds available. It is about organizing the effort on national and local level to actually develop good bankable projects and to have successful tendering, also to have successful selection of a contractor who is well positioned to implement the project successfully. Unfortunately, in the environmental sector, we had very bad examples of utilizing EU funds, even loans, when due to the low capacity of the national stakeholders, but also contractors, we had projects which were not successful. I would expect in the energy sector in the years to come to face similar challenges, and the main focus of the government and all stakeholders will be really to improve the absorption capacity for the utilizing the available funds.
Thank you, Anna. Vedate?
I fully agree with what has Anna said, and it's so important that some things I will maybe repeat. It's true that the initiative has to come from the local level, and that we have to have projects which can find sources within all these funds. I like to say when people ask and argue how much the energy transition will cost, it's a $1 billion or $1 billion question. So there are just some estimates how much it can cost, and I don't like to play with these figures. And for me, it's not the point how much does it cost. The point is who is going to pay these costs. So as I said, just transition and coal phase out are just one puzzle of this picture. There are many other puzzles, and each of these segments has to find its financing. And to find its financing, as Anna said, we have to have projects which are bankable. There are many funds among those which have been mentioned. Also, some 2 years ago, this fund was initiated, and last year it was launched, the Coal Region and Transition Fund. It's an actually initiative led among the energy community, and also with partnering with the World Bank, etc., with the aim to help regions which are relying on coal to not just phase out coal, but also to have a just transition for all the workplaces in this sector. Just 1 week ago, the European Commission published the Western Balkan Investment Framework for the coming period, where a huge portion of the money will be allocated for the energy transition, for phasing out coal, for introducing renewables. But again, I like the sentence Anna said, the absorption capacity of our countries has to be good in order to attract this money. So no matter in which era we live, the money is always there. So we have to have good projects. Stefan said we used these long-hanging fruit, these easy projects like energy efficiency, etc. Now it's the turn to go with some more concrete projects, starting with phase out of coal, etc. But we have to prepare these projects. But before preparing these projects, we have to set a vision. And this vision has to be set from the local level, and then later coming to the state level. Many municipalities in Bosnia and Herzegovina do have developed certain action plans, sustainable energy action plans, sustainable energy and climate action plans. However, they lack in implementation due to the fact that many of these plans are being prepared just for the purpose of preparation. It's not a real intention to do something about it. Whereas there are certainly some examples in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I know it's the case also in the other countries, in Serbia and North Macedonia, and also in Western Balkans, which are very good examples and going ahead and just grabbing one project after the another. And people, when look from the side, say they are favored by somebody. No, they are just having they set a clear vision that they want to be either climate neutral or a green municipality, whatever. But they have set a vision. They want to change something, and they are doing something to do this. Also, 2 days ago, the EBRD published also a very important notice about the platform initiative, whereas the EBRD is going to invest a huge amount of money just for phasing out coal from different types of industries, including also thermal power plants. So the message is clear. EU wants to be until 2050 climate neutral. We, as potential member states, are going to one day join this family. And if you want to be part of this family, you have to play with these rules, which says be climate neutral. And EU, frankly, is really helping and providing funds. But again, we have to be the ones who come and with the proposals and say these are our circumstances, and make projects based on these circumstances.
Thank you, Stevan. Regarding the Serbia.
Okay, I will. You will be shocked about this, but I will still continue about the future and the past. I will actually, given that I mentioned that in Serbia the investment goes into continuing with this fossil fuels-based past, I would actually turn that question around. I do this on purpose because I'm often upset about the quite a frequent response by the skeptics when it comes to the energy transition, who say that the transition that they're advocating is just far too expensive. This is for the rich nations of the West. We can't afford that. Now, before we begin discussing the cost of the energy efficiency, clearly in Serbia at least, we still need to discuss the cost of avoiding the transition or staying in the past. And with that in mind, I want to draw the attention of everyone in this call to a report that was put together last year by the Secretariat of the Energy Community, which outlines just how much money is being invested in the form of public subsidies. So taxpayers' money being directed by way of subsidies into the coal mining and thermal power plant sector just to keep them alive. So I think it's useful to highlight the enormous cost of the existing system before we begin discussing how costly the transition is. My point is we cannot afford the existing system. It's basically the opposite of what the fossil camp says. The question is not can we not afford the energy transition. The certainty is that what we have now we cannot afford. And let's not remember we're discussing climate neutrality. Let's not fall into this short-term trap that is basically being walked, the short-term trail of policy making that's being walked by policymakers. Must we in our region remind ourselves of 2014? I can say that in Serbia alone, because of the flooding in 2014, which had 1/4 of the territory, close to 25% of the territory, and on top of, I think, several dozen casualties, we also ended up losing the cost of that catastrophe was close to 1.5 billion euros. I believe the year ended with a recession, with our GDP falling by 4%. Why do we not remember how costly it is? And I think it's useful, perhaps it's because I'm always involved with some sort of communication efforts, but you will forgive me for wanting, at least when it comes to Serbia, to remind everybody of the horrendous cost of the status quo. That's unfair, we cannot afford it. What's the public health cost of the existing system? We never hear about the in excess of billions wasted on lost working days of people not being able to work due to chronic illnesses, of direct hospital costs which result from the effects of the systems that we have now. My point being, we cannot afford to stay in the past. It's just not something we can afford. I can even quote the saying that we have in Serbia. Maybe other people have heard this before. Nismo dovoljno bogati da si priuštimo, da kupujemo jeftine stvari. We're not rich enough to buy more coal plants. Okay? We just cannot afford them. Besides, most of these assets will end up most probably being stranded assets because they will never be able to operate to their full term, given the policy environment in which they will operate. Another tipping point, which was a keyword that I liked in that respect, is before we move towards estimating the cost of transition, is this notion of how investments in renewable energy capacities are being implemented now. One tipping point absolutely has to be, as soon as possible, the move from these quota-based feed-in tariffs towards a market-based, auction-based, public auctioning system of supporting the investors in renewable energy capacities according to a market-driven mechanism that actually drives prices down. What we have now is also something that we cannot afford in the future. What we need to have is a transparent procedure of stimulating investment in renewables, which will inevitably drive costs down. And with this section, I think it's useful to perhaps finish this contribution by drawing people's attention to the results of the recent auction in Albania, which I hope you will forgive me for not being able to quote the exact price, but it proved that solar generating capacities are probably the most competitive if an open competitive procedure is allowed. Okay, these technologies depend on different countries, our geographies, etc. But I think it's safe to conclude that solar is one aspect that's dreadfully underused in our region, across the region. And the sooner we switch to these market-driven systems of supporting investment, the sooner we'll get into a stage where this investment becomes much more cost-effective, and we stop this discussion of how much will it cost. What we then need to focus on is making sure that the people who are now dependent on those fossil fuel industries are not left behind. And oftentimes that's also another cost that's overlooked. It's not just about the financial cost. People will need non-financial assistance as well in making sure that these entire regions, which we now have in our countries, who objectively speaking depend on the continuation of the coal industry, are actually given a chance, like we advocated earlier, for participation. We need all our communities to participate in building that future. If they are given a chance to build that future, I think also there will be a much smaller political cost as well. And that's quite important as well, given the political structure of decision-making in our countries. So before we accept the vocabulary of costly energy transition, let's also never forget to remind ourselves and other people we talk to of just how ridiculously expensive it is to continue this fossil fuels-based system that we have now.
Thank you, Stefane. Well, after everything you said, and since our time is expiring, I just wanted to ask all of you, what do you honestly think? Are we really ready for traditional climate and energy processes in the broadest sense, in the field of public policies and decision-making processes, policy-making processes? And to finish in maybe positive manner, how do you see joint efforts on regional level for a better climate? Thank you.
Yeah. I must be honest and claim that we would like to be prepared, but in reality, we're not really ready for the energy transition. Why I'm saying this? We undergo all these processes of developing scenarios for the coal phase out. We also implement these economic instruments which contribute to penetrating of renewable energies. But in reality, we have currently a brand new government which is not yet consolidated. And in the program of the government, it is said that in the first 5 years or during the term of this government, we would increase the participation of renewables by 5%, which is not much, I would say, considering the potential of the country and also the available financial sources. Still, they claim in the program they will implement the green scenario of the energy strategy. But when it comes to exploitation of mineral resources, they say in the program that they will continue investigating the availability of coal on our territory. So there are various contradictions in this program, and civil society noticed these contradictions. These are so-called mixed messages, and once we will have a straightforward answer to the simple question, are we ready for the energy transition? I think we will be also able to consider also the social policy related to job losses once we will need to close the existing thermal power plant, once we will need to close down also the equipment, to shut down the equipment now working on the coal mine. So also the services which are all related or participate into the value chain of the electricity generation from coal. So it is a significant contributor to the GDP, but it is also significant contributor to the CO2. And that's why I don't think this government is prepared for a very straightforward and efficient energy transition because even though we have the strategies in place, we are now developing laws, we don't have clear idea about the intensity of implementation of renewable energy, and we didn't consider yet a comprehensive social plan for the impacts related to the jobs of people once all this business around the coal and coal burning will need to be shut down. It is not optimistic, but I think it is realistic. I would expect this governmental term will need to expire. So next government will need to face this challenge. Meanwhile, I would expect also the pressure from the public and pressure from the civil society to increase because they already started challenging this governmental program. They started pointing to these inconsistencies in the program and the lack of determination to implement the green scenario, which the same government adopted last year in the energy strategy. We need greater maturity as a society, and I don't expect that the government alone will wake up and work on this energy transition. I think that the people, the public, and all these aware parts of the community will need to continuously put pressure and question these decisions to start investigating into the coal reserves and so on. But the most sensitive issue is really this social impact. I think it is a huge challenge also for the European Union. So we need to learn from the Green Deal, of course, because it also deals with these social issues.
Anna, I would just ask you to conclude because we are like in the mid.
Yeah,
feel
okay. So, all in all, I think we are not prepared, and we need to continue working on the topic. Yeah.
Thank you very much. What are your conclusions?
Yeah, I will.
Are we ready?
I will try to be very short and. If this is not a wake-up call, I don't know when it will be. So we have to really open our eyes, see the future, and as Stefan said, looking into the past won't bring us too much ahead. So there are many opportunities ahead in front of us, many challenges. I like to when speaking about these things, to say that the Japanese philosophy is quite interesting and how addressing these things. For instance, when we mention the term crisis, it's always negative point. In Japanese crisis is which means both opportunity and a threat. And also the energy transition, we are facing now a coal crisis, if I may say so. And for one hand, it's a chance, and on the other hand, it's a threat. So let's take the opportunity. It's a kiki, yes. And let's take this opportunity and go ahead.
Thank you. Stefan, your conclusions?
If you think about the energy systems that we will need to be successful at decarbonization, you understand quickly that we will either succeed or fail together. I think the key point is to basically understand that these notions of energy independence in these isolated small markets, which are not used to working together and cooperating, that's just basically investment in staying in the past. And I think everyone knows here what that means. If we want to invest in the future, it means that we will need to work together to have a flexible energy system, one that basically uses and maximizes the strengths of our entire region in terms of potential for renewable energy, in terms of a more flexible system that's easier to balance. There are technical requirements which are better satisfied by a system that's not just integrated within our region, but also with the European Union. So I think it's safe to conclude that the future means together, and the past means everybody stays separate, and we continue to work in these isolated policy spheres which don't yield the kind of ambitious results that we want.
Thank you very much. Our time already expired, but the topic is very important and interesting. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and experience. This video is going to be available on our YouTube channel. Once again, thank you, and we are on the same line, fighting for the climate neutrality.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.